The sound of my spine hitting the hardwood conference room floor wasn't the worst part. It was the laughter that followed. I wish I could tell you I was surprised, that I didn't see it coming. But the truth is, humiliation has a very specific smell. In that moment, it smelled like burnt espresso, cheap cologne, and entitlement. My name is Julie Hartman. I'm 34 years old. And until that Monday morning, I thought I understood what disrespect looked like. Turns out I was wrong. To really understand what happened, you need the full picture. Picture a long mahogany table, 40 executives, and one meeting that could determine the future of the company. I was standing near the head of the table with my laptop, preparing to present a compliance report that would finalize our largest partnership deal in a decade. And then he walked in. Dave Price, the CEO's only son. 30 years old, designer suit, permanent smirk. The sort of man who believed ceilings were for other people. He strolled in 2 minutes late, sunglasses still on, acting like the room had been waiting for his entrance. He spotted me sitting in the chair next to his father's, the chair I'd been asked to occupy for the last 3 quarterly presentations, and his expression hardened. "This seat belongs to me," he said, loud enough for the room to hear. "Move." I didn't have time to stand before he shoved the back of my chair. I slipped. My heel caught the leg of the table and I went down. Hard. Papers scattered, my laptop clattered, and 40 people gasped in the same tone they might use while watching a glass fall off a counter, fascinated but unwilling to intervene. The CEO's face didn't even twitch. Dave slid into the seat, stretched his arms out, and looked at me like I was an inconvenience temporarily ruining his air. No one helped me up. Not the executives, not the assistants. Not even the CEO, who'd once told me I was indispensable. I stood, dusted off my blazer, and took a seat at the far end of the table, the seat reserved for interns and visitors. My hands were shaking, but my face was calm. I had learned long ago that anger, when quiet, becomes sharper. Dave passed the meeting folder to the CFO and whispered loudly enough for half the room to hear. "Some people need to learn their place." If you had looked closely at me in that moment, you might have seen a flicker. Something cold, steady, and oddly collected. Because while Dave believed I was retreating, what I was actually doing was watching, observing, taking note of every arrogance-soaked comment, every dismissive eye roll, every time he cut someone off. I wasn't reacting physically, but mentally? I had already drawn lines on a map he didn't even know he was standing on. What Dave didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that I had spent the last 6 months quietly auditing internal discrepancies I wasn't supposed to see. Numbers that didn't add up. Transactions marked executive discretionary. Inventory that vanished off the books. And every single trail of breadcrumbs circled back to one very familiar name. Dave Price. But here's the thing about being underestimated. It gives you freedom. Invisible people can move quietly. They can gather evidence. They can prepare. They can wait for the exact moment the world stops laughing. That night, while Dave celebrated his presentation at an overpriced steakhouse, the same presentation I'd prepared, I sat alone in my apartment with my laptop open and every spreadsheet, every email, every timestamp glowing on my screen. It was all there. Every wire transfer, every shell account, every falsified inventory document. Dave hadn't built a career. He'd constructed a time bomb, and he had handed me the detonator. At 2:14 a.m., I finished drafting the final email, the one addressed to the board of directors, to the external auditors, to the Federal Compliance Office. At 2:17 a.m., I scheduled everything to send at exactly 7 a.m., 20 minutes before the CEO's daily briefing. At 2:18 a.m., I sat back in my chair, exhausted and steady. I didn't want revenge. I wanted truth. And truth, when released at the right moment, is louder than any push, any insult, any room full of silent witnesses. The next morning, at precisely 7:03 a.m., the first call hit Dave's phone. By 7:10, there were 12. By 7:40, 47. By 8:20, 81. And when I finally stepped out of the elevator and saw him standing in the hallway, pale, sweating, eyes wide like a trapped animal, his phone lit up again. 138 missed calls. He looked at me like I held the answer to all of them. And in a way, I did. But this? This was only the beginning. I've always believed there are two kinds of silence. The peaceful kind, and the kind that means a storm is forming. At 8:32 a.m., my manager Lauren appeared next to my desk. She looked more apologetic than surprised. "Julie," she whispered, "the CEO wants you in the executive conference room. Now." I gave a small nod, closed my laptop, and followed her down the hallway. As we approached the glass double doors, I heard raised voices. Sharp, frantic, nothing like the confident corporate tones normally echoing in that room. The moment I stepped inside, 6 pairs of eyes swung toward me. The CEO, Richard Price, stood at the head of the table with a stack of printed emails in his hands. His jaw was clenched so tightly the muscles near his temples pulsed. The CFO and COO looked exhausted, as if they'd aged 10 years in the past hour. And Dave looked like he hadn't slept at all. His tie was crooked, his normally perfect hair disheveled, and his phone, still buzzing nonstop, sat face down on the table like a wounded animal. I caught a glimpse of the notifications lighting up the edges. Board members, external auditors, private numbers, unknown numbers. One message preview read, "Urgent, immediate explanation required." The CEO held up the stack of papers. "Did you send these?" he said. "Or is someone using your name?" The room fell completely silent. Everyone seemed to be holding their breath, waiting to see whether I would crumble under pressure or stand my ground. "Yes," I said. "I sent them." Dave let out a sound between a laugh and a choke. "Of course she did," he snapped. "She's been trying to sabotage me for months. This is some psychotic revenge stunt because she can't handle being told no." His father shot him a warning glare, but Dave wasn't stopping. "She manipulated the data. She hacked into—" "That's enough," the CEO barked. He turned back to me. "Julie, these are serious allegations. You're claiming massive compliance violations, financial misstatements. You're accusing my son of fraud." "I'm not accusing anyone," I replied calmly. "I sent documented facts. Dates, transactions, transfers, emails. Nothing more." The COO cleared his throat. "I've reviewed some of the files. They're concerning." The CFO added, "If this is accurate, we're exposed on multiple regulatory fronts." A faint tremor crossed the CEO's face. The first sign that the storm he'd been ignoring for years had finally reached his doorstep. He pressed his palms against the table. "I need to know exactly what you accessed. And how." That was the question I'd expected. The question Dave needed me to stumble on, so I didn't. "All information came from my authorized access level," I said. "I never opened anything I wasn't allowed to open. But some documents were emailed to shared drives they shouldn't have been, and some approvals came from accounts that didn't belong to the supposed sender." The COO's head snapped toward Dave. "Did you authorize these?" he demanded, pointing to one of the printed emails. Dave's throat bobbed. "It's not what it looks like." His father slammed his hand on the table. "Then what is it, Dave?" For the first time, Dave didn't have a rehearsed smirk-ready answer. His face flushed red. Sweat pooled at his hairline. His phone buzzed again, illuminating the screen. "Board chair, call me back immediately." He turned it over quickly, but not before everyone saw. I watched something break in his expression. A crack in the facade. The CEO inhaled a slow, shaky breath. "Julie, I want you placed on administrative leave while we investigate, with full pay." I nodded. I expected that. It wasn't punishment, it was protocol. But before I could step out, Dave stood abruptly, sending his chair skidding backward. "You don't get to do this to me," he spat. "You don't get to ruin my life because you're bitter about a chair." There it was. The truth of who he was. A man who believed consequences were optional. I met his eyes, steady. "I didn't ruin your life, Dave. You built the life you're living. I just turned on the lights." His face twisted with fury. As I walked toward the door, his voice cracked behind me. "You're going to regret this." I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. Because what Dave didn't know, what none of them knew yet, was that the emails were only the beginning. The numbers he'd manipulated were just one layer of a much bigger problem. The real storm hadn't arrived. Not yet. And Dave was about to discover that the fallout from one push didn't end on the conference room floor. Sometimes it echoed through every corner of a life built on lies. Being placed on administrative leave should have felt like a break, a forced pause after months of tension. Instead, it felt like sitting in a theater where the movie had paused right before the twist, and everyone else kept watching without me. The next morning, I woke up to 3 texts from coworkers. They're pulling audits from the last 3 years. Board called an emergency session. Dave hasn't shown up. Rumor is he's working remotely. Working remotely. That was one way to describe hiding. I tried to distract myself with coffee, a walk, anything. But by noon, my phone buzzed with a number I recognized. Lauren, my manager. She didn't waste time. Julie, the board wants to talk to you. Today. My stomach tightened. I thought I was on leave? You are. This is voluntary, but I think you'll want to be here. 20 minutes later, I was in a rideshare headed back to the building I had just been told to stay away from. The city outside looked normal. People chatting, traffic honking. A dog walker swept along by 3 impatient terriers, oblivious to the corporate earthquake unfolding several stories above them. When I arrived, security didn't stop me. They nodded, buzzed me through, and one of them whispered, "Good luck." That alone told me the situation had escalated beyond anything I'd imagined. The board met in a smaller conference room than the executive leadership team used. Less intimidating, more intimate. But the atmosphere inside was anything but gentle. No one was shouting. No one was smiling. Everyone looked carved out of stone. The board chair, a woman named Eleanor Grant, gestured for me to sit. "Ms. Hartman," she began. "Thank you for coming. We're conducting an internal review and we need clarity on several items." I expected that. What I didn't expect was the next sentence. "We have corroborated some of your initial findings." I sat a little straighter. Corroborated? How? Eleanor exchanged a look with the company's general counsel. He slid a folder across the table toward me. "These documents were discovered early this morning," he said quietly. They were recovered from a shared drive Dave had access to, but mistakenly secured without the proper encryption. Mistakenly secured. Dave's arrogance had finally worked against him. I opened the folder and scanned the top sheet. It was a bank transfer, $38,500, routed through a consulting firm I'd never heard of. The next page showed another transfer. Then another. All variations of the same pattern. Over 6 months, more than $400,000 had been moved from discretionary accounts into entities that existed only on paper. My pulse steadied, the way it always did when something clicked into place. "This wasn't just misuse of funds," I murmured. "This was deliberate asset diversion." "Yes," Eleanor said, "and it gets worse." She nodded to the general counsel again. He pulled up a video on the screen at the front of the room. My heart stopped. It was security footage. Timestamp, 11:42 p.m. 2 weeks ago. Location, Level 4 server room. Dave entered the room wearing gloves, a hoodie pulled low, and carrying a USB drive. He typed in an admin code he shouldn't have had, plugged in the drive, downloaded something, and left. The general counsel paused the video. "We believe he extracted proprietary data, financial models, pricing forecasts, possibly client lists." A cold knot curled in my stomach. Why would he? Eleanor finished for me. Because he may have intended to walk away with it, or sell it. It didn't feel like a corporate investigation anymore. It felt like a crime scene. "And his father?" I asked carefully. "Does he know the full extent?" "Not yet," Eleanor said. "We're giving him time to process, and to decide whether he wants legal counsel." My breath caught. "So the CEO himself is under review?" Eleanor nodded. "If he ignored warning signs or signed off on approvals without due process, he may share liability." This was no longer Dave's storm. It was a hurricane with 2 targets. A knock on the door broke the tension. The auditor entered, holding a printed spreadsheet. "You need to see this," he said, handing it directly to Eleanor. She scanned it once. Her expression tightened. "Ms. Hartman," she said slowly, "did you have any knowledge of these vendor accounts?" I leaned closer. 12 new vendors, all added within the last year, all paid regularly, all with mailing addresses that didn't match real locations. "No," I said. "I've never seen those before." "They appear to be shell vendors used to siphon funds," the auditor explained. "And the approval trail leads back to—" He stopped himself, but he didn't need to finish. We all knew the name. The meeting concluded with one request. "Julie, please stay available. We will likely need you again." When I stepped back into the hallway, my legs felt unsteady, but my mind was sharper than ever. This wasn't about a push anymore. It wasn't even about humiliation. It was about uncovering a truth the company had ignored for far too long. And as I headed for the elevator, I received one final text from an unknown number. "You think you've won? You have no idea what you've started." No signature, but I didn't need one. Dave had found his footing again. He thought he was ready for whatever came next. He wasn't. I used to believe that fraud was always about money. Numbers on a screen, transfers, spreadsheets, missing funds. But what I learned over the next 48 hours forced me to rethink everything. Sometimes fraud wasn't about greed. Sometimes it was about fear. 2 days after the board meeting, I received another call, this time from someone I never expected. The CFO, Mark Levinson. A man known for being meticulous, quiet, almost painfully cautious. He asked if we could meet privately. "Not at the office," he added. "Somewhere neutral." That alone told me the storm hadn't peaked. We met at a small cafe near the river, the kind of place where the barista wrote inspirational quotes on the chalkboard and the chairs didn't match. Mark arrived wearing a baseball cap pulled low and no suit jacket, the closest thing to incognito a CFO could manage. He sat across from me, glanced around, and lowered his voice. "Julie, the board hasn't told you everything." My stomach tightened. "About the shell accounts?" "About why they existed," he corrected. I didn't interrupt, not when his hands were trembling slightly around his coffee cup. "It began a year ago," he said. "Small inconsistencies, minor overpayments. I flagged them to the CEO, privately, but he brushed them off. Said Dave was learning the ropes." I exhaled slowly. That sounded exactly like Richard Price. But then the payments grew. New vendors appeared. Unauthorized contracts were signed. I confronted Dave directly. His jaw tightened. That was when I realized something was wrong. Not just with the finances, with him. "How do you mean?" I asked. Mark hesitated. He wasn't just reckless. He was panicked. Panicked. The word settled heavily. He continued. "I thought he was covering personal debt. Gambling, maybe, something irresponsible. But last month, one of the shell vendors tried to collect on an overdue payment. Except the person contacting me wasn't a vendor." He paused. "It was a loan broker." My breath caught. "Loan broker? As in Dave had taken out private loans," Mark said. "Large ones, unsecured, the kind people only take when they're desperate." "How large?" "Nearly $1 million." He swallowed. "And the lenders weren't the kind you negotiate with." I felt a cold pulse travel down my spine. "So he used the company to pay them back." Mark nodded. Or tried to. But the money wasn't enough. He owed more than he could siphon without raising suspicion. A new realization hit me like a punch. "He was planning to steal the proprietary data," I murmured. "To sell it." "We believe so," Mark said. "He was setting up a quick exit strategy. The shell accounts, the server room activity. It fits." My skin tingled with dread. "And his father?" I asked. "Did Richard know?" Mark leaned back, exhaling shakily. "That's the part we don't understand. Either he knew and ignored it, or Dave hid everything from him. Both possibilities are devastating." The cafe noise around us faded into a distant hum. Suddenly, the push at the meeting, the shove that sent me to the floor, felt different. Not random arrogance, not just entitlement. It had been an eruption of everything Dave had been barely holding together. Fear disguised as dominance, panic masquerading as power, and I had stepped into his path at the exact wrong moment. Mark ran a hand over his face. Julie, there's more. Last night, the board found a second set of spreadsheets, hidden behind a mislabeled archive file. What kind of spreadsheets? Employee accounts, HR files, performance reviews. He met my eyes. And your name shows up far too many times. A chill swept through me. What was he doing? I whispered. Tracking you, Mark said. Your access history, your passwords, even your schedule. It looks like he was preparing to frame you for the discrepancies. My heart thudded painfully. He needed someone to blame, Mark explained. Someone credible enough to make the fraud look like an internal breach, and you... I was the perfect scapegoat, I finished. Mark nodded, regret heavy on his face. He underestimated you, he added. He didn't think you'd fight back, and when you did, you exposed everything. My pulse was steady but slow, the kind of calm that felt dangerous. What happens now? I asked. Mark hesitated. The board is meeting tonight. They've frozen Dave's access. They've restricted the CEO's decision-making authority, and they've hired an external forensic firm. Do they know about the threats? I asked. Mark's expression hardened. Threats? I pulled out my phone and showed him the anonymous message. He paled. This isn't good, he said quietly. Not at all. Before I could respond, a group of people hurried past our table, speaking urgently. One phrase drifted toward us. Security escorted him out of the building. I turned sharply. What did they say? I asked. Mark exhaled. It's already begun. What has? He met my eyes squarely. Julie, Dave has disappeared. My breath caught. Left his apartment, turned off his phone, abandoned his car in the garage. No one knows where he is. A coldness unfurled inside me. Because the truth was simple. A man with everything to lose was now a man with nothing left to protect. And that made him dangerous. Very dangerous. The night Dave disappeared, sleep became a stranger. Every noise outside my apartment, footsteps in the hallway, a car door slamming, the elevator dinging, made my pulse lurch. It wasn't paranoia. It was preparedness. People backed into corners, sometimes lashed out. And Dave was pressed into every corner of his life. By morning, the company had activated a security alert. Employees were instructed not to share internal updates, and security increased patrols in the lobby. Rumors spread faster than facts, and the truth was fragile in the chaos. At 10:14 a.m., my phone rang. An unknown number. My breath caught. Julie Hartman? A voice asked. Yes. This is Detective Ramos with the Financial Crimes Division. We're assisting the corporate investigators. We need you to come in today. A part of me relaxed for the first time in days. Law enforcement involvement meant the situation was shifting into territory Dave couldn't manipulate. 2 hours later, I sat in a sterile interview room at the precinct, Detective Ramos across from me. He looked calm, methodical, the kind of man who had seen far worse than corporate fraud. He slid a folder toward me. We've been tracking Dave's movements. I opened it. There were security camera snapshots, grainy but clear enough, showing Dave at an ATM withdrawing large amounts of cash. Another image showed him entering a motel on the outskirts of town. A third showed him leaving in the middle of the night with a backpack. He's running, I said quietly. He's trying, Ramos corrected. But his accounts have been frozen, and we have a warrant. I exhaled, tension loosening from my shoulders. But then Ramos leaned forward. There's something else. He opened another folder. This one thicker. Inside were printed emails, screenshots, and a list of attempted login traces. He tried to access your accounts, the detective said. Your corporate email, your personal cloud storage, even your banking app. A chill moved through me, slow and sharp. He was desperate, Ramos continued. And desperate people make mistakes. He left a trail. It hit me then. Not just what he had tried to do, but what he had become. A man so terrified of consequences that he'd tried to shift them onto the nearest person who threatened him. Julie, the detective added, I want to be clear. We don't believe he intended physical harm, but he did intend to destroy your career. I nodded, absorbing the truth. Heavy but solid. We found where he was headed, Ramos said finally. He booked a bus ticket out of state. Officers intercepted him at the station less than an hour ago. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The words washed over me slowly, like a tide pulling back. He's in custody now, the detective finished. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel satisfaction. I just felt done. Later that week, the company held a mandatory town hall. The entire staff gathered in the largest auditorium, tension running through the room like electricity. The CEO, Richard Price, walked onto the stage looking 10 years older. He adjusted the mic, swallowed hard, and began. Transparency is our responsibility. As of today, my son has been charged with embezzlement, wire fraud, and attempted data theft. The company is cooperating fully with authorities. Effective immediately, I am stepping down. A ripple of shock spread across the room. He continued, voice breaking. I failed as a leader. And worse, I failed as a father. No one applauded. No one whispered. It was one of the rare moments in corporate life when humanity outweighed politics. After he stepped down, the board chair took his place. We are implementing new compliance safeguards, she announced. We are restructuring leadership, and we would like to acknowledge the person whose integrity brought all of this to light. My stomach tightened. Julie Hartman, she said, please stand. I didn't want to. My legs felt heavy, but slowly I stood. The room erupted into applause, loud, sustained, and startling. Not admiration, not celebration, recognition. Recognition of someone who refused to stay silent. 3 months later, the company was quieter, more cautious, more transparent. Dave accepted a plea deal. 5 years in federal prison with restitution. His father moved out of state. The forensic audit concluded, and the damage, while extensive, was repairable. As for me, I was offered a promotion, Director of Corporate Compliance, but I declined. Not out of fear, not out of resentment. Because somewhere along this journey, I'd learned something important. Justice and peace weren't the same. One required action, the other required stepping away. Instead, I accepted a role with a nonprofit that protected whistleblowers. Work with meaning. Work where people didn't push others down to rise. On my last day, Mark, the CFO, stopped by my desk. You saved this company, he said. No, I replied gently. I just refused to let it sink. He smiled, the kind of smile people give when they finally understand something they should have seen long ago. As I walked out of the building for the final time, sunlight poured across the pavement. Warm, steady, real. I didn't think of Dave. I didn't think of the fall. I didn't think of the humiliation or the anger or the months of unraveling lies. I thought of one thing. When someone pushes you down, you get to decide whether you stay on the floor, or whether you stand, lift the truth, and let it speak louder than the push ever could. Justice isn't revenge. It's restoration. And I had finally restored mine.